This video is sponsored by Patchworks, Seattle synthesizer store. More on that later.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Means Recording, and I am here in front of my quote-unquote live system to walk you through this hybrid Eurorack setup, how it works, what it do, and, maybe get some tips and tricks along the way on how you can prepare a live Eurorack system for performance or a live performance in general. Shut up. This is the rig that I have been using for live performance for like the last year. So when somebody asks me to do a live stream or something like that or prepare a longer live set, this is where I go. And that is because it's the perfect combination of mutability, playability, and deterministic sort of sequencing. And it's just turned out really great. I really, really like it. I've dialed in all the voices to exactly what I want. There's no fat in the system. It's fantastic. So let me tell you what the flow of stuff is here. The main sequencer is the synthstrom deluge. This is an amazing little device that does so much. It just does a ton of stuff. It's like a DAW in a box. It has very robust internal sequencing for samples and also for synths, but it also can send out MIDI and CV to sequence other things, and that's the case I'm using it here. This is my main drum and sample playback device, but it's also sending out MIDI to this system. And you might be asking yourself, well, how is it sending MIDI out? Isn't this all control voltage? And you would be very, very wise to ask that question. The trick is to turn control voltage into MIDI. Now, to be clear, this has 2 CV and 4 gate outs, meaning this can drive 2 voices and then have 2 gate outs to do stuff, but that's not enough for me. I have 4 voices. I am using gates 3 and 4 out here to get Pamela's new workout, which acts as my main clock source for the Eurorack system. That's getting clock and reset from here. So this can send out analog clock and run, which is awesome. So that's the CV connection from the deluge to this system right here. MIDI out, going into it's down there. It's called a MIDI Solutions Quadra through. It's a MIDI through box. MIDI is a protocol that can have up to 16 channels on it, and I have a couple things here responding on different channels. So my 4 voices in the Eurorack system, the Iteritas, Mutable Instruments Brads, the Qubit Surface, and the Polycinematic from Nebula are all on different MIDI channels. So because I need MIDI in a few places, including a MIDI cable going into the Polycinematic and into the Octatrack for clock, and into my MIDI to CV converter, I needed something that could take one MIDI cable, which is coming out of the deluge, and through it out, split it out to other things. And that's where the quadra through comes in. It's just 1 in, 4 outs, just spams that MIDI all over the place to all the other channels. And then it's up to the sequencer and the devices that receive the MIDI to agree on what channel they belong in. So MIDI throughs, pretty good to have. So what is taking my MIDI signal and turning it into something that speaks Eurorack? Well, I already said the Polycinematic's actually getting a straight up MIDI signal because it actually has a MIDI in, and I can play that right here. We'll get into what's happening down here, but if I went to my deluge, I can play it right there as well. So MIDI going into the Squarp Hermod, which is actually a sequencer, but I am using it to this much of its capabilities right now and just using it as a MIDI to CV converter. It's what I had around. It takes MIDI and USB in and spits out CV if you want it to, basically just translating every single, channel. What if I went like this? Is this better for me? Yeah. Every single channel on the Squarp Hermod can be assigned an incoming MIDI track. So like I said, I got that going to our friend, the Polycinematic. Here is our Iteritas. And here is Brad's. And here is the Qubit Surface. We'll talk about effects in a bit, but that's how things are going here. I have set up this as the only thing that I really need to mess with from a sequencing standpoint, which is really important in a live setup. You do not want to have to reach around to a whole bunch of stuff and worry about where your sequencing is coming from. So let's talk about the Eurorack system real quick, and then we'll get back to this stuff over here. So you may have noticed that I can play on here, but I'm also playing here. I knew that the set that I was going to write needed a fair amount of musicality, meaning I was going to do some chord progressions and stuff that were going to be very hard for me to do on the isometric keyboard that the Deluge offers. So I was like, hey, I can send MIDI in from a real keyboard, in this case, the Arturia Keystep, and I can play and record like I would if I had a keyboard in front of me. And that was a really big part of getting the sound that I wanted to. The theme for the thing was like Hearts of Space, which, in case you don't know, was a really classic down-tempo ambient show on, I heard it on NPR. Really, really cool shit. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this like spacey, tribal kind of thing with like big chords. I'm going to modulate between different keys. And man, I cannot drive with isomorphic keyboards at all when it comes to musicality. If you can, good for you, but I can't do it. I had this Keystep right here, and I can switch channels by holding Shift and a key. Which gives me relatively quick access to being able to play all my parts here. And the really cool thing is once you've set up the MIDI channels in here by, I think you hit learn and a pad, and then you play something from the MIDI controller in the MIDI channel that you want it to listen to, then it will listen on that channel. And even if you're in what's called song mode in the Deluge, where you're not in the individual track, it will record to that track. So I don't even have to leave the mode here that allows me to like launch clips and launch samples in order to be able to record to these different parts, which is huge. It's so much fun. So that's what's going on there. We'll get back to the Deluge in just a second. Let me walk you through the rack as to what's going on over here in terms of the voices and what they're passing through and why. We already talked a little bit about the fact that the polycinematic exists in here. I've done a whole video jam on this that I'm actually really proud of. It was a really fun time with this system. This is a polyphonic oscillator, sort of a cinematic polyphonic digital oscillator with a wonderful reverb built in. It's got a few different waveforms, a built-in filter and VCA, and it's just really nice to be able to have chords in your system, or if you want, lead lines. So that's all just the polycinematic. That's all you're hearing right there. That's all its internal effects and filters. Really wonderful little compact oscillator for this kind of thing. Next up is my bass voice, the Noise Engineering Manus Iteritas. It's running into one channel of Blades, which is the Mutable Instruments dual filter. Pique here is getting a trigger signal. This is an envelope generator, and this is going into Blades, meaning that while Manus Iteritas actually doesn't need a lot of help, it's got a built-in VCA and a built-in sort of low-pass filter, I like to shape it with a filter afterwards, because I just get that added layer of control there. After Blades, it's running into the Z5000 from Tip Top, which is a multi-effects unit. I wanted this Manus to be a little stereo in some cases. So most of the time I'm running it on like a chorus mode, so it gives it a little bit of high-frequency stereo imagery. But for this set, I have it on the reverb, which you can hear is pretty damn nice. So, Manus into Blades into Z5000 for our bass. Next up is Brads. Mutable Instruments Brads, the macro oscillator, many different sounds in here. It is running into the WMD Javelin, which is a VCA plus an envelope generator. And what that means is, while Braids does have an internal VCA that you can set up, it's buried in a menu. So if you want to do attack and release and decay stuff with it, you need to actually pass it through its own VCA and bypass the internal VCA. And the reason that I do that is the same reason that I have the envelope generator for Blades with Manus. That ADSR, that attack, that shaping that you could do with a VCA, you can hear has a gigantic effect on how the sound sounds. So between that and all of the different like oscillator voice types I have in here, I have a huge swath of shapes and colors and timbres I can play with. That is running into the second channel of the filter that we just talked about. A little bit of drive on both of them. And the Javelin has a envelope out. So the envelope that it uses for the VCA also can be sent out to something, which is really, really cool. I cannot state how awesome the Javelin and the earlier WMD Steady State Fate, I think it's called ADSR VCA or something like that. It's just really nice in a compact system to shove both your VCA and your envelope generator together, so you don't really have to think about it. It's just one little module. Now, you're hearing a lot of effects on that, and that's because after it comes out of Blades, it runs into Data Bender, Qubit Data Bender. I have a video on this. It's a glitchy little like rearranger. It makes little glitches and stuff out of audio, and it's just a wonderful texture here. Hear that blah, 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 blah. It's actually clocked, so once the sequence starts here, we will hear it clocked, which is really, really cool. Finally, that is running into the Effectsaid XL from Happy Nerding. It is a multi-effect unit. I have it all loaded up with custom effects because you can do that. It has a little web app, and you can choose what effects you want on it. So for me, it's just chock full of reverbs and delays, and a few modulation effects, just in case I feel sassy. But mostly, I just want that big-ass... that wonderful big-ass reverb. I'm a big slut for reverb. And finally, we have the Qubit Surface. Isn't that wonderful? Qubit Surface is a physical modeling voice. It's a digital voice. Everything in here is a digital voice, actually. So the thing that I love about Qubit Surface is that it has all these different modes, and each one has a vibe. We heard the pluck string one. We heard this electric piano one. This electric piano one's nice. And then finally over here, we have this thing. I love this one because it's like this little plucky percussion thing, but when you're in a sequence, you can get big with it by going turning the tone up and going into that. So it kind of becomes like a whole nother texture. Now, in case you haven't figured out, there's a wide range of tones coming from this thing. And that's why I love it. I can take this mode knob, scoot it on over to a different mode, and all of a sudden my line that I had playing through it sounds completely different than it did before. So, lots of performance options here to change timbre on the fly, which I really, really like. The other thing about Surface is that it is semi-polyphonic, just like Rings is from Mutable Instruments, so you can have sort of these polyphonic lines going on. They won't cut each other off, which is beautiful in this kind of thing. A lot of options there. I forgot to tell you what Surface is running into. The one and only Mimeophon from Make Noise, a clocked delay that can do reverse. And if that doesn't wet your whistle for it just right there, I don't know what can. That reverb you're hearing is the halo effect on the Mimeophon. It's just such an amazing delay. I wish I had more room for more of them because it does everything in a delay that I want. And that reverb, the halo effect is just like, Next up, we're going to talk about what the Deluge is going to do from a sample playback point of view and sequencing point of view. But before we do that, a word from our sponsors.
This video is sponsored by Patchworks, Seattle's synthesizer store. When I moved back to Seattle, I started looking for places to check out with people doing things that I was interested in. I found a cool little event called the Synthesizer Petting Zoo, put on by what became Patchworks and the local synthesizer community. It was a welcoming, fun event with tons of cool gear and really friendly, knowledgeable people. Since then, Patchworks has grown into an awesome retail space with all the same values and a lot more gear for sale. With a focus on community and connecting you with the right piece of gear for what you want to achieve, the staff at Patchworks is passionate, knowledgeable, and will talk your ear off for an hour about what you're into. Their goal is to connect with joy through the magic of synthesizers. If you're in Seattle, check out their brand new showroom in Fremont on Stone Way, and if you're looking to buy online, check out patchworks.com. Thank you to Patchworks for sponsoring this video. I want you to check the link in the video description for more info on all that. And let's get back to the.
Hi, welcome back. How'd you like that? That was my first sponsored post for Patchworks. It's a new thing I'm doing. By the way, all these glowing cables you see here are from a company called Modbang, which Patchworks sells. You can have your whole system glow. So the first thing I wanted to do was get some vibe samples in here. And I got those from NASA's website to start with. They have a bunch of samples of like NASA sounds, like stuff from space, and also a bunch of astronaut sounds. Each one of these is just sort of a sequence of random little samples with a lot of attack and release and decay on them. Long things that just add this vibe in the background. And you're going to hear something really important in a second here. Listen for this reverse sound. Okay, did you hear that reverse wash? That's going to come around here and again in a second. And what that is doing is providing me a wash into the downbeat, a sort of reverse riser into the downbeat, which is really, really important. Here comes a bigger one. When that comes around, we're going to have some drums come in. So it's probably a familiar feeling to you to hear like a riser like that lead into a downbeat. But sometimes we forget that it's just such a cool thing to add to our sets if we can. So if you're creating loops or creating sequences in a sampler or some sort of thing, build in those tension moments that lead into the next section, and either swap them out as you go through or bring them in and out in some way, because they add so much to the topology of your mix and everything. It's really, really fun, and it gives you a cue as to when to bring something in next and have it feel very musical, right? So let's talk about the drums. I knew I wanted a lot of hand drums. All of the effects you're hearing are internal deluge effects. So that was my first drum line that I brought in. The second drum line that I brought in is a sort of like anchoring drum line. This is actually a pretty big one here. You'll hear that it has a semi-regular kick drum, these sort of like tonal hits, and then these little pickup notes. That's when I knew I wanted to like anchor the beat down and start insinuating more of a rhythm. Next up, I'm sort of building these layers. I was like, you know what would be really cool? Some like ethereal vocals. So these pink channels up here are all vocals. This was the first one that I made. These are from a sample CD, why do I keep calling them that? I am stuck in the 90s. Sample collection from Black Octopus that I got from Loopmasters. Really beautiful ethereal vocals. And they just play on top of everything. So there's another channel of that is very similar, but happens a little bit more fast, because I found that these samples were getting cut off when I started adding a bunch of samples. And I'm not sure if that's part of the beta firmware that I have going on with the Deluge right now or not. I hope it's not part of the Deluge in general. Generally, this thing is a rock solid machine for that. And then we have this sort of voodoo African drum slash chant thing, because Hearts of Space was all about this sort of like pseudo-ethnic dead can dance kind of vibe. So I'm like, okay, well, let me put this in here. And I think it sounds really good in here. I like the combination of like tribal and space. I think it sounds really, really cool. But that could be because I listened to a lot of Schmongel when I was younger, and now it's stuck in me. This little bit here is a series of those little vocal samples that modulates between a major and minor. So I'll show you what I mean. We start off in C minor, and then this hits an E natural. So we can also go from A flat major to B flat major to C major. That modulation where the E goes from flat to a non-flat, E natural, is a really cool sort of mystic sounding, cinematic sounding thing that I like to do a lot. So I wanted to build that in there so that when I launched this, I knew that that's the sequence that I'd be playing down here, whereas everything else is very improvised around, just like C minor. So those are the vocals. What else do we got going on? We have a lot more drums. So we've listened to the drums so far. This drum channel right here is harder hand drums. So we're building the drums up. But there's always a little bit of space going on, right? A little bit of like groove. Next up is an actual drum beat. And this is just a little kit that I made with that little extra bass in there. There's some sidechaining going on in here, and the way the deluge works is that, like, by default, when you're in a drum kit down here, this bottom one becomes one of the sidechain cues. So when you're loading stuff into the deluge, unless you want to do some extra assignments, the first sample I load in a kit is always sort of a throwaway, unless it's meant to actually trigger the sidechain, and then I immediately move up to the next one in the kit and do my main stuff there. I keep my kick drums on the first sample slot of the kick so that I'm actually, doing what I want to the sidechain, if that's what you want. We also have some hi-hats to go with that. And what I like to do with hi-hats, there's a couple cool things happening here, is like I like to interchange my hi-hats so that it sounds like someone's kind of actually playing a hi-hat. I try to find two or three that have sort of a vibe together. And the thing that I also did with this is on the last backbeat, so the 4 of every bar, I put a whole bunch of probability on these last 4 things. They may or may not actually hit. And on the upper channel here, I have these like noise hits. So what's going to happen is at the end of every bar on the 4, we're going to hear a little noise hit and maybe some hi-hats will drop out. So, what does this mean for you? Well, build groove into your patterns. Any way that you can have the system sort of do things for you in a sort of alive way using probability, do it. Like, it's really, really good. And for me, I really like dropping out that last quarter note and like kind of focusing it down like a little end of bar empty instead of a fill. It works really, really well for me. Finally, we have another drum beat. This one's a little bit more Sibient, a little bit more hard. So let me switch between them. This will switch at the end of the loop. Here we go now. So this one's just a little tiny drum loop. I actually meant this to go a little bit faster. I actually tried it at double speed. We're at 69 BPM right now, nice. And I tried actually pushing this up to like around 140 by putting the backbeat on the faster backbeat sort of spot. But in the end, I just decided to leave that syncopation, that sort of like 16th note syncopation or 32nd note syncopation, and leave it slow because I didn't want this whole set to get too big. I didn't want to accidentally make a banger. I just wanted to make something that had a little bit more energy. I can launch all of these clips either immediately by holding shift and pressing the appropriate button for that channel, or I can press a button and it will come in when the loop has finished, which means I can sort of like set things up to change if I want to, and that includes all my MIDI tracks. So let's talk about that real quick. I'm going to record something because we need that to talk about the last piece, which is the Octatrack, okay? Okay, so there's a recording. So what the Octatrack is doing is not only is it passing all of the audio from the modular system into it, it's actually set up to record it and slice it up and do fun things to it. So in order to make this clear, let me go ahead and record something into it. I'm going to eschew the drums, and then we'll turn this whole thing off, and you'll hear just what this is doing. Okay, so now I need to have slices in here. So I'm going to go ahead and put in some trigs. So this is playing back the buffer of what we just recorded and transforming it. There's a bunch of LFOs going on to move this through slicing. So now we're going to record the surface here. And now you can hear that we just recorded the little chimes from the surface. So this is pretty much how I use the Octatrack. I use it to record in from modular or vocals and have it sliced up and do interesting things there. There's a ton of effects on this, like, I don't know, it's kind of cool. You can get all kinds of extra textures depending on what you record into it. That's all for me today. I really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for Patchworks for sponsoring this video. Check the link in the description for all that good stuff that I mentioned in the sponsored part. I hope this was fun for you. I'm going to be using this system a lot this year and many years from now, and it may change a little bit, and if it does, I'll let you know. But for right now, Deluge, Octatrack, modular, sometimes vocals, just is my jam. Really, really allows me to do a ton. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Beans Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.